Before I came to record this episode of the Backlog Bunker, I was actually worried that I wouldn't have much to talk about this week, because I bought Sonic X Shadow Generations on a Friday for PC and I played that on stream, but then I waited a few days and figured, yeah, I might as well just buy it for PS5 anyway. I got it on Monday, and I've done nothing but play it since. I played a little bit of Honey Pop 2 every now and then, but I already talked about that game, and there's nothing more I have to say, because it's still just Honey Pop 2, but I spend most of my time playing Sonic X Shadow. You might wonder how, at this point, I still haven't beaten the game, despite having played it all week, and that's because I'm going for 100%, and I figured I might as well do that while I, go through the game normally, because most of the footage that you're going to see behind this episode is just me retrying levels over and over and over again, either for better times or for all the collectibles, which, the collectibles in Shadow Generations are also far more accessible than the red rings in normal Sonic Generations, though it's not, 100% true all the time. It's mostly just because there's only 3 of them, so it makes it slightly easier to get them, but at least in Sonic Generations, the red rings that you could get were on completely different paths, so you at least figure out more of the game as you played it, whereas with Shadow Generations, they're always on the most efficient paths, I think. Don't quote me on that. So going for them is, like I said, more accessible, but it's also not quite as involved as Sonic Generations, and between the two, I probably prefer Shadow, but either way, it still makes the game more fleshed out than it was before, so I can't really complain. And in terms of the game itself, I'm actually really happy with it, because Shadow Generations is, in fact, the best game since Sonic Generations. I know Mania is also pretty up there, but not only do I prefer 3D Sonic to 2D Sonic, in most cases, Mania also, I thought, was just, pretty good. And in terms of an objective metric, I actually haven't gotten really that much into Mania to even be able to say that it's that much better or worse than Generations, because I have them both at 9s, but I consider Generations to be better, because I just feel like there was more meat to Generations. In Generations' case, in all of its reused levels, they still make new things. Even if you're playing as Modern Sonic in Speed Highway, it's still a very, very different Speed Highway than it was in Adventure 1, because there's different games. And even for the games that do control somewhat like Generations, like Colors, Planet Wisp isn't even kind of the same level as it was in Colors, because Colors didn't have any levels in it. But that's for a different episode. Whereas for Mania, every act of the repeated zones ended up just being the first zone, or the first act from the zones as they were in the previous game. Act 2 shook things up, obviously, but that's only one act for a zone, as opposed to Generations, where everything was different. But to get back to Shadow, like I said, I'm only happy with what we've gotten. I wish it could have been longer, but as what's essentially just a slightly shortened Generations on top of Generations, I can't really complain with what we got, especially since, like I said, there is a lot to do in the game. But not all of it is necessarily good, because when I say that I'm happy with what we've gotten, I'm most talking about, the game, the parts of the game that actually are a video game. The Sonic stages that are Sonic stages, because a lot of the time you spend in Shadow Generations actually isn't spent on the stages themselves, it's spent on the open world, or the pseudo-open world, whatever you want to call it. If you know anything about me, which you should by the time you're 10 episodes into the series, is that I don't like open worlds, and I think that it's a huge waste of my time, especially in a Sonic game, because I also did not play Frontiers, at least not a lot of Frontiers, so coming back to this game and having it be basically Frontiers with stages was disheartening, to say the least. But at least in Shadow Gens, the open world is not only quicker to get around than it was in Frontiers, but it's also not quite as in the way if you're not going for 100%. Which, obviously, I am, but that's my choice. If I didn't want to go for 100%, then I wouldn't do it. But you do just have the option to skip most of the open world, because you don't have to do most of it. You do have to do some of it, because they'll force you to use, the Chaos, the Doom Morph, or the Doom, whatever the water one's called, to get around the map, to get to new levels. But for the most part, there's only 6 levels, so you shouldn't really have to worry about it. And though I said that going for 100% is just an option, it's still not the greatest thing in the world, because when you actually look at what you have to do for 100%, you're collecting a bunch of random screws that are just hidden around the world, and not all that fun places, because the movement in the open world isn't all that fun to actually do. And getting all the screws doesn't give you anything, it's just something to do for 100%. And that's the kind of open world game design that I really, really hate, because it's 100% for the sake of just collect a thing. It doesn't do anything, they're not fun to collect, they just exist to make a number go up. And if I wasn't adding this to my collection, I wouldn't care about the number going up, but unfortunately I do, so I am. And I guess I maybe should have waited until I actually beaten the game, or I'd actually beaten the game before I came to record this so I'd have more to talk about. But honestly, there really isn't much to say beyond the fact that I think the stages are really good. I mentioned before, but I'm just having a blast right now going through the stages and trying to get better times. Like I said, most of my footage is going to be me getting better and better times in the stages, even if I get all the collectibles. Though there are some cases where I do just settle for an S rank. I think the only time that I didn't just settle for an S rank and try to get like an actually better time are cases where I knew exactly what to do to get better times, and so I didn't feel like just sitting around and not doing the thing, and it was sitting there right in my face. I think the only things left to comment on are like the Doom powers, which I don't feel too strongly about one way or the other, because things like Doom Spears are just Chaos Spears, but you can target multiple things at once. And even then, it's not like that really matters, because there's no normal Shadow generations where you only have one Chaos Spear. That's just a thing Shadow can do in this game. So advertising it like some new power is misleading to say the least. Doom Blast is cool, but I don't feel like it's used nearly enough to really make a difference in the game, especially on like the teleporting enemies, because their whole thing is that if you don't have Chaos Control when you run up to them, then you're just not going to be able to use Doom Blast. I think, because there were a few times when I was running Chaos Island, and I think on stream, not in my own playthrough, but when I was doing Chaos Island on stream, and occasionally the teleporting guy would just be there for me to be able to hit without me having to do Chaos Control first. I think it also happened on Sunset Heights, actually. That might be in my footage. But that whole enemy I didn't really understand. So Doom Blast was, I'm not going to say inconsistent, because it's more like the enemy was inconsistent, but it's something that I wish was utilized a little bit better, because even when it's properly implemented, it's not all that interesting, or at least it's not used in interesting ways. Like in the Space Colony Arc Challenge acts, you mostly just use it to aim at the place that is not going straight forward. I think in Sunset Heights there's one challenge act where it's like, you hit one into a wall. It's not even like you have to look for the wall or aim for it or whatever. It's literally just an enemy in front of a wall, and you use Doom Blast on it, and you hit the wall. It's just not all that engaging. I think the best place it was used is in Kingdom Valley Act 2, where you would use Doom Blast. I think it was also in Act 1, but I forget. Where you would use the Doom Blast to hit the enemies into the spinning things that would cause the wind rails to appear, because that's like actually aiming at a thing. And a lot of the times they would automatically aim at the rails, but sometimes they wouldn't, and that's why I think it was best used, because the enemy itself counts as a hitbox to use on the rails, and then afterwards you teleport to the enemy, but then you still have to homing attack onto the rail itself. Or if you're like that, you can just use boosting and stomping to get on the rail yourself. That's, I think, a little bit faster. Don't quote me on that. So yeah, it's not like it's impossible to use Doom Blast well in the game. I just don't think it happens all that often. And Doom Surf is like Doom Spears, and where it's not really a power, it's just a thing Shadow can do, and it's just a lamer version of how things work in Generations. Because in Generations proper, you can just run on water, because, duh, it's a Sonic game. And if anything, Shadow should be able to do the same thing too, because he literally has air shoes, but I guess we needed to surf in this game, and have it control slightly worse than the normal game. You could argue that Doom Surf controlling differently is what actually makes it worth having in the game, but I think I'd rather have just had it control like Shadow does normally, because in Sonic Generations, running on water is like one of the best parts of Seaside Hill, and in Unleashed, it's one of the best parts of that game, period. Doom Morph is strange, because I like the power and concept, and in how it's used most of the time, but I find that it's a bit inconsistent, because I didn't realize until my playthroughs for this video that the way Doom Morph works with the little ball things is that you can swing on them, or whenever you let go of the swing, it will launch you in the direction opposite of wherever you are on the ball. The inconsistency came in that sometimes whenever I would try to launch myself off the ball, it just wouldn't. Specifically when I would try to go directly up, but in most cases it just was inconsistently functioning. I doubt that I'll have to look hard for the footage in this scenario, because I ended up replaying Chaos Island a lot of time trying to get a better time, and the cases of Doom Morph working inconsistently were most of the causes of my runs not being all that good. So that part I'm not really, confused about, because it seemed pretty obvious to me. But it hurts because I really do want to like Doom Morph. It's a very interesting idea for a power, but the whole launching thing not working consistently hurts my enjoyment of it, because half the time I go into a level not knowing what's even going to happen when I try to do anything, which isn't helped by a certain control problem, though calling it a control problem might be overselling it a bit, because the thing that I do a lot of the times when it comes to cases like the Doom Morph are I hold A. So for example, you run up to one of the Doom Morph balls and you homing attack it, and do you tap A to homing attack it and then continue on as normal, or do you hold A? because in my mind, it feels more natural to hold A because it just feels like a smoother motion to me. However, most games will punish me for this because if I hold A and then try to continue holding A to do whatever I need to do for another A press, it will just not work because obviously I didn't press A again. I'm still holding A, and the games that I play that do this will usually push that muscle memory out of me. However, this is not the case for Shadow, because in Shadow, if you hold A going into the Doom Morph thing, then if you're still holding A and you get to another Doom Morph ball, it will automatically log onto it and then start your swing, which bothers me now, because now I'm used to the other way, where eventually it should just stop working and I stop doing it. But I keep doing it and it keeps working, so it feels weird to me when it does do that for the Doom Morph, because, again, you can hold A going through the wall and into another ball, and it will just do your homing attack on it. But if you play the game normally, and you just try to hold A to do multiple homing attacks, it's not going to work, because obviously, that's not how pressing A works. So it creates an inconsistency where in half of the game, you do need to press A multiple times, because obviously, but then in other parts of the game, specifically with the Doom Morph, you don't need to press A multiple times, and so it creates this inconsistency where you don't know how many times you're supposed to press A to do a certain thing. Which also isn't helped by the fact that they're basically the same function, because since they're both homing attacks, they create this association in your mind, where sometimes homing attacks do need multiple A presses, and sometimes they don't. Now I admit this is mostly a me issue, it wouldn't be a problem at all if I just always press A, but I don't always press A, and so it's weird that it works inconsistently. I just think it's kinda strange. And I mentioned challenge acts before, like I said, I still haven't beaten the game, so I haven't done all of them, but I will say that I like the challenge acts in Shadow Generations far more than I do in Sonic Generations. This isn't to say that Sonic Generations challenge acts are bad, they're actually better than I remembered them being when I played them like a while back, but most of them are very, very gimmicky, like the Vector one where you're just bouncing his music note back and forth. Like sure, it is by definition technically a challenge, but it's not a challenge that has anything to do with most of the game, so why does it matter? Whereas in Shadow, basically all the challenge acts are levels in and of themselves. They're like what Colors tried to do with its entire level structure, but good and better. I guess Colors DS might be a better point of comparison, but again, it's like what Colors DS did, but good. What Colors DS did if it wasn't shit, I should say, to be more specific. Oh, and I guess one more thing to comment on that I'd almost forgotten about is, I think the stage selection is also kind of weird for Shadow Gens, because Space Colony Arc, okay, get it, absolutely, sure, go ahead. Radical Highway, okay, I also get that, that's Shadow's first stage, go off. Rail Canyon? From Sonic Heroes? I know that Sonic Heroes technically has Shadow stuff in it story-wise because of the whole android thing, but at the same time, it's also Sonic Heroes. Everyone shares the same stages in that game because that game's awful, so you can't really put Rail Canyon in there and be like, oh yeah, this is the Shadow stage, because it's not. It's Rail Canyon. Everyone goes there. Heroes in general is an odd place to go to for any Shadow content, because he also fights Metal Overlord in Shadow Generations, but Metal Overlord is a Sonic boss. Why does he give a shit about Shadow? I know that in his battle quotes he'll say, I am the real Sonic and I'm the ultimate life form, but that feels kinda tacked on, because that's not at all what he cared about in Sonic Heroes. I made a video recently about retcons in Sonic, and this feels like one of them, because to go back to the Metal Overlord fight, and then have him be like, I am the true Sonic, and also the ultimate life form. You know, it feels like he added that sentence on last minute. And then Chaos Island is also a strange pick, because Shadow's never been to Chaos Island, and as far as we know, he's never going to be on Chaos Island, because Sonic Frontiers is over. Is this foreshadowing that Shadow might go there in the comics? I don't know, maybe. Is it foreshadowing a Shadow Generations 2? I don't know, maybe. Is it foreshadowing that Frontiers 2 might take place in the same islands as the first game did, and have Shadow in the game as well? I don't know, maybe. Just kind of feels like a half-hearted excuse to reuse level assets from Frontiers, which, like, obviously that's how games work, but could you not have been as blatant about it? Overall, I don't really have much else to say about Shadow Generations. I mean, I talked about it longer than I thought I would, but still, 15 minutes is not very long for a game that, so far, I'm absolutely loving. Like I said, best game since Sonic Generations. And since Shadow Generations is just a part of the Sonic Generations package, at least nowadays, I think that makes Sonic X Shadow Generations the best Sonic game ever. Because Generations already was the best Sonic game, and there is no argument about that. So now that they're just a part of the same thing, it's just a good game made even better with more also good content. I suppose you could ask whether or not Sonic Team will be able to keep up this momentum, because as far as I'm concerned, I think they've only made bad games since Mania. Because people love Frontiers, but I don't. I think that game kinda sucks. So whether or not they'll be able to keep going forward with good Sonic games is completely unknown to me. Because Colors, as far as I'm concerned, was just kind of whatever. Then Generations, which was the Sonic game all about going back to older shit, was a fantastic Sonic game and the best one. and then years and years and years and years and years pass, and then Mania comes out, and it's the next best Sonic game, and it's also about rehashing old shit. And, you know, one's an instance, two's a coincidence, but then Shadow Generations comes out, and it's also a Sonic game about going back to old shit, and it's the best one since Generations. If two's a coincidence, then three's a pattern. I'm not saying that they can only make good games whenever they rehash old shit, because the level design itself is obviously different, I mentioned that earlier, but it does feel like they're creatively bankrupt when it comes to coming up with new shit, because even in Frontiers, the parts that people like about that game, which are the cyberspace levels, are also rehashing old shit. So even when it comes to Sonic games that I don't think are very good, but that other people like, that's also rehashing old shit. So when will they make a Sonic game that's completely new, that's also good? Because they made Superstars, and that was completely new, and that game sucked. So it's hard not to be cynical, but if they made a Silver game, then it wouldn't matter how good the game is, because I would love it anyway. And since we didn't really play anything else this week, I guess we're just getting right into the weekly topic, which is what I mentioned all the way at the beginning of this video when I said that I was worried I wouldn't have much to talk about this week. Because this would be a 15-minute episode if it wasn't for Guilty Gear coming out with its latest patch, or at least the latest patch notes. I don't know if the patch has actually been updated to the game yet. And for once, I'm probably not going to end up using footage for background to this part of the video, because I think it's far, far funnier to use all of the quote retweets of the balance patch update tweet to scroll by as we go through this, because my god, this might be the worst fighting game patch I've ever been here to personally witness, because Fighters is also a very different game than when I used to play it, as I mentioned in the previous Backlog Bunker, but I wasn't there when that patch happened. I came back to it like 2 years later, and the game was a very different game. But I'm still playing Guilty Gear Strive, and this patch is coming, so this might just be the worst patch I've ever actually had to experience. To get the obvious out of the way, they mostly nerfed my characters, because Sin's stamina is now hard to recover, which was like the whole fucking point. That is to say, the whole point was to tie it to a resource that wasn't infinite, but that wasn't hard to get back. You're not supposed to be able to spam stamina moves, but you should be able to use them frequently and consistently, because otherwise, the character is kind of bare bones to play. It's like having stamina in Zard, where if you don't have any, then all of your special moves just kind of fucking suck. But now they're packing the game to make that on purpose, which is bizarre to me, so that part I don't like. Leo, they made his non-stance neutral worse, and his actual stance neutral better, which, on the one hand, I want to praise, because Leo's stance neutral is like one of the few things I have as a problem with that character, but at the same time, if they made his non-stance neutral worse, that's the part that I didn't like about the character, is that his non-stance neutral fucking sucks. Now, fucking sucks might be a bit of an over-exaggeration. Leo's still a very strong character, but things like his air moves kind of fucking sucking, making all of his air-to-air interactions awful, are things that I wish were better about the character that haven't really been fixed and have only really been made worse. I think the most offensive one to me is making his cross-up special move worse, because the entire thing that I use that move for, aside from just raw cross-ups, are that if you use it at a certain range, it becomes hard to tell whether or not it's going to cross up or just hit forward. But now that it moves way slower, it's way easier to react to, and so you don't have to worry about whether or not it's going to cross up or hit forward. You can just fucking grab Leo out of the dash, which was already a problem you have to deal with, because most people are going to be expecting Leo dash, and so they're just always going to be grabbing. And since grabs are also based in direction, it wouldn't even matter if the move crossed up, because they would just throw you in the opposite direction anyway. So having that move be worse is deeply saddening, and Leo's non-stance neutral is slightly more deeply saddening, because I'm not a huge fan of stance characters. I play Leo because he's a fun character that happens to be a stance character, so I kind of wish that things weren't this way for him. Then there's Soul, who's just been a weird mix of buffs and nerfs. Because while Soul absolutely did need nerfs because he's a very powerful character, I'm not sure if the way to nerf him was to make his special moves more lame to use and take away Guard Crush on Fafnir, and to make him have different combos now, and to make all of his spacing tools like / just worse. Like, I don't think nerfing Soul is some kind of puzzle to be solved. He does too much damage, so make him do less damage. Then to the characters that I don't really play, I just sort of touch every now and then. There's characters like Anji, who I think kinda sucks, but then in the patch notes, they're like, oh yeah, Anji's whole thing is that he's a very risk-reward type of character. But we felt that he had too much reward, not enough risk. But like, the only thing I ever feel when I'm playing Anji is, damn, how much risk am I in? And I mean that both in terms of the literal term of the word and the actual in-game mechanic risk. Because blocking as Anji is scary, because he does not have very good reversals. He has an interesting reversal, but whether or not you'll actually get reward off of it is dubious at best. But hey, jumping dust does more damage, so that's cool, right? And then Chip, who I'm pretty sure has only been buffed. I haven't actually looked at it because I don't really play Chip. I want to play Chip, but I don't. So I can't really speak too much on his buffs or nerfs. Though I will say the tightrope seems like a bit too much because Chip was already known for being one of the higher damage characters in the game, balanced out by the fact he doesn't have a lot of health. So I don't think that the thing he really needed was, oh, let's just give him a new combo tool. Especially if you're not going to replace the combos he already had. Because if this makes his combos more efficient, he's just going to become a stronger character. And if they don't make his combos more efficient, then no one's ever going to use tightrope. So it feels like, why even add it, you know? Then Axel, who's a character that I want to play and that I find him very interesting, but a character that I don't want to play and that he's a zoner. So I haven't actually ever really done anything with him. But they've changed all of his input, or not all of his inputs, but they changed a lot of his inputs. And again, I'm not an Axel player, so I don't really have a dog in this fight, but it seems like other Axel players are very irritated by this because they've built up an entire muscle memory system of this is how you play this character. And so having to change the entire input of how you do that is disheartening to them, at least. And to me, I'm not a fan of charge inputs, again, despite the fact that I play Leo. So I'm not really I'm not really complaining about this, but at the same time, Axel's supposed to be a zoner, and when a zoner throws out a move, it's supposed to have a risk to it and preparation. So the entire thing of him being a charge character kind of made sense, because that's his whole deal. If he's not a charge character and can just throw out his full screen fireball whenever he needs to, then like, what's he even doing being a zoner? This is just gonna make him a more annoying zoner, no? And finally, a character that I actually play a lot, but that I haven't talked about yet, because it's the one character that's been made better, is Kai. Kai was the first character that I ever actually liked playing in Strive, because when I first started playing Strive, Sin wasn't in the game, and because Sin wasn't in the game, I wasn't buying it. So, and I didn't know I liked Leo yet, so early on I just played Kai, because I wasn't really that used to playing Soul yet, and I didn't have any other characters to play, so I would just play Kai when I was playing with friends, or at a club, or whatever the case may be. But then, eventually, I started getting bored of Kai, because Kai is very much the basic bitch character in Guilty Gear, and so even though he was, at that point, my best character, he's the one I could most consistently win with, I didn't really like playing him all that much, because he's kind of boring. But Kai has only been made stronger in this patch, and all of my other characters have only been made weaker or less fun to play. So it seems like, going forward, if I want to continue playing Strive, I might end up gravitating back towards Kai, which is insane to me, because I spent so long in the Kai mines not liking that character. And so, what, am I gonna go back just to play more consistently? I don't know if it's worth it. I'm not gonna, like, completely stop playing Strive, at least not yet, but it's definitely not looking good right now. Maybe if they add Jam back, it'll be a different situation, but Jam's not in, so for now, let's not think about that. And the last thing before I go is I'm gonna pour one out for all the Potemkin players out there, because it seems like no one is a fan of this patch as far as Twitter is concerned, and the thing that I've seen the most consistently, going through all the quote retweets and whatnot, are that Potemkin players might need to be put on suicide watch, because they are distraught over that character's inputs and card cancels being changed. Well, change is a strong word for the card cancels. They just don't exist anymore. So, they are in shambles. Even though the character has technically been buffed, no one seems to want to play him anymore. My characters have only been made slightly less fun or slightly less good, and in the case of Kai, they're actually slightly better. So, in comparison to what the Potemkin players are going through, I'm deeply, deeply saddened by their loss. My condolences to everyone who likes Potemkin. And now a moment of silence as we close out this episode for all the Potemkin players who may or may not have been lost to the ether because of this horrible, horrible, awful, no good, very bad patch.
Potemkin.